Welcome, everybody, to whatever episode this is of the Networking Podcast. You guys will see the number in the title. I'm not going to say it. This might be episode 3, 4, 5, 10. Who knows? I don't know. Do you know?
Nope.
Alrighty.
So
now,
go ahead. No, I was going to say we're just going to jump right into it. I think there was some announcement made this week about Arista's Cloudvision as a service, essentially hosted in a cloud somewhere. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I've had discussions with other folks about this. I wanted to get your take on it. Not necessarily specifically Arista and Cloudvision, but the whole idea of having a data center or network, let's say, management system that lives off-prem in the cloud, but is able to manage things such as config, even I think if I read the announcement correctly, bootstrapping ZTP type functionality, stuff that is historically
does it actually do that?
I think we should. I think
we should probably check, but I'm sure there's not that much meat in the announcement, right? I'm sure the reality is far from how it's.
I'll do a quick check, but anyway, there's the whole concept of offering that kind of service. Firstly, who is it for? And secondly, how do you feel about managing your network using a system like that?
Okay, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, this could
I know.
be a long episode.
Maybe it is. Maybe that's great. I don't know. Let's just talk and see where we end up with it.
Alrighty. So, I guess there's a few things that come immediately to mind, right? First is who the target customer is. Now, Cloudvision or any other management system, of course, is going to kind of be more on the not wanting to do it yourself side of things. I think running it in the cloud is even further removed from not wanting to do it yourself, obviously, because you're not managing the actual management system itself. So I think there's I don't know if there's that many customers that fit into that kind of category, right? The ones that are both not going to do it themselves and also not wanting to run it on-prem. So I think we're talking pretty niche at that point already. I could be wrong, of course. These are my thoughts and only my thoughts.
Of course, this is our own personal thoughts. I think that there's opportunity in the enterprise space for just those folks, like you said. But I think that it's a pretty big enterprise space is still pretty big. I think it's a shrinking market every year. I think that we're kind of realizing the shift to the cloud, and that's happening more at the medium and larger now enterprises. But there's definitely a shift to the public cloud, which is shrinking that whole data center market, I think.
I'd agree with that. People are moving more and more applications off-prem, and that means the data centers on-prem can justifiably get smaller, right? For sure, that's happening. It's a trend. Nobody's going to debate it.
I think it's what I was going to say, I think it's still a pretty large market. So I think that enterprise market's pretty large. Within that enterprise market, you need to find those who are looking for those management systems, which I think a lot are. And then the next step is precisely the announcement, which is not only are they going to run some sort of fabric or network management system, but they're going to host it in the cloud, and the enterprise is
and manage it because there's two sides to this, right? There's the general hosting it in the cloud. That's one thing. A customer could take any management system and host it in the cloud. They could do that and like stitch the networks, run an IPsec tunnel and bridge it to on-prem. But what's really interesting about this announcement is that they are going to host it. This is not a just run our application in the cloud. This is you're buying our application as a service. We are going to host it. We're going to pay for it to be hosted. Of course, they're going to charge you for it. I don't think they're giving this away for free, but
no.
So that's another. I mean, why can't a customer just host it themselves? I mean, all right. So actually, before we even get there, I'm going to go super high level. My initial thoughts. One, security is a concern, right? I think the general idea of having something running in public cloud that is either directly accessing your network or, I mean, to your point, bootstrapping your network, I think there's a bunch of enterprises out there that will be no bueno with that, and that they won't want that stuff going over their WAN, even if it's in IPsec. I just think there's going to be security conscious customers that are going to be like, no, I'm not putting all this information in the public cloud. Vendors in general have struggled with that, right? So,
agreed. Agreed, but I do think that's a shrinking. That's also
Sure.
shrinking. In other words, people are
It's
getting
what,
more
like
and more comfortable with
healthcare, maybe
trusting.
financials, like
Yeah.
it for sure. Beyond that, I think pushing everything to public cloud, especially when you think of things like ZTP, I mean,
But
so you're
don't
gonna
get hung up on that because I need to look it up. I thought I read
okay,
that in the
okay.
announcement, but don't get hung up on ZTP
I won't.
specifically.
I'll try not to get hung up on the ZTP thing. But
Okay.
no, I mean it's interesting. We're seeing this in the application world, right? Like I mean, I'm sure SaaS is a model that I don't even need to go look at charts, right? SaaS as a model is absolutely taking off, shooting through the roof. Like this is a huge emerging deployment model. I don't know what else to call it. That customers are very, very interested in, because at the end of the day, do you know who is the very best at operating something like Cloudvision? The vendor that wrote it.
Arista, exactly.
Yeah. So I see it. I get it. Outside of that, I mean, is that the problem? Is that our problem statement? Like, what is this really trying to solve? Because there's a few things, right? It could just be solving the general, I don't want to host this myself. It could be solving the general, I don't want to deal with lifecycle management, because at the end of the day, these systems get deployed and they need to be updated and maintained over a period longer than 12 months, right? Like there's going to be maintenance involved. In theory, pushing that off to the vendor is a good thing. I'm not opposed to that idea.
Right.
But I don't know if that is necessarily linked to public cloud, right? That's the bit I'm hung up on a little bit, and that to me seems to be the biggest value, in that you're no longer dealing with the maintenance of the product that you purchased. You're moving to a pure OpEx model. You're no longer dealing with CapEx. I'm assuming, I actually don't know how they sell this thing, but I'm assuming it's pure. I'd be very surprised if it's not a pure OpEx model, right? I'd be surprised.
Yeah, agreed.
Because once you're in, you're going to keep getting that recurring revenue, and that's good for a vendor to get that recurring revenue. But I don't know.
I think it's all about the easy
a lot
button,
of these.
dude. I think it's all about the
You
easy
think it's easy button?
I think
It could be.
I think
It could be.
the whole thing is, if I can deploy the equipment and I can do all my management through something that already exists, I don't have to worry about finding servers. I don't have to worry about maintaining those servers. I don't have to worry about all that aspect of it. That's an easy, give me an easy button to your management system. But just quickly, before I go too far off topic, it does say turnkey automation for initial and ongoing zero touch provisioning, ZTP as a service, configuration management.
So it's an initial. It's an initial, right? Initial and ongoing.
Yeah, but ZTP as a service, which is crazy, and then including automated
ZTP
upgrades, network rollbacks, and network snapshots, right? So it's the full. I mean, it seems like it's the full gamut of what you would want. You would expect something like Cloudvision to do, but hosted in some sort of hosted environment.
All right. I mean, yeah. There's so much here, right? Like, as an enterprise, do you want to give full control to your vendor? Like, I mean, people generally don't like vendors anyway, right? They're a necessary evil. Do you want to double down on having them manage it for you too? Again, there's value in having a vendor manage the solution that they provide, right? And we've seen this with a bunch in the application world. It's a big deal in the application world. We're seeing things like SAP, and I'm sure there are others. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but in general, applications running as a sort of the general SaaS model, people like it. People like it a lot, and there's no denying that. But you need to be solving a big problem for somebody, right? That is the reality. I don't know if taking a management system and just throwing it into the public cloud and having it managed by the vendor solves a problem for you.
Yeah, and I wonder if that would have happened, and then maybe I'm just ignorant and I'm missing some knowledge on this, but if the idea of going from bootstrapping to management, to lifecycle management, to provisioning of an on-prem infrastructure component was something of value, that we would have seen this on the server side before the networking side. Now, of course, the assumption there is that those are kind of closely tied, so the server guys probably aren't going to be able to get approvals to send a bootstrapping process, Pixie and all that sort of stuff, all the way up to like a public
this is
cloud.
the thing, right? Like, it's
so maybe my assumption that the server world would have gotten there first is wrong. But that being said, I haven't heard of this type of deployment. If we're talking software specifically, like software running on top of infrastructure, maybe. But when you're talking about the actual infrastructure itself being entirely managed off-prem, I would have assumed that maybe the server world would have gotten there before the networking world. Although, as I was saying, like I just kind of
you would no, I mean you would think, right? Like I think it's a fair question. Are we solving something in the network? And there's no shame in admitting that the application world moves faster than the networking world, right? We've talked about that before a bunch of times.
It has. I mean,
it has. It's the reality.
It's reality.
Right? It's the world we live in. Yep.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. So I think it's a valid assessment that if the application world didn't find the value in this, then to be fair, I'm going to pause there and say there are solutions out there for the server world to deal with patching and maintenance that are controlled by the vendor that provides it to you. I mean, Canonical is a great example of this, right? I don't know exactly what the solution is called. It's called like Live Patch or something. It's probably not called that. Certainly not called that. Sure. But they do have a solution where they will manage the general maintenance of your server from a software perspective. So it exists. It's not super. I don't know how much they're succeeding with it. I'm not even going to pretend to know. But I struggle with like I said, a few things. One is, what is the problem statement? Is the problem statement that the deployment and operation and maintenance of something like Cloudvision is a problem that operators are dealing with today, and Arista is solving that for them by dropping this into public cloud managed entirely by Arista? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's it, right? Maybe that's a big enough problem.
Yeah, I think that may play part of it, and the reason is just from my previous experience, and this is not anything specific to Cloudvision and its operational challenges, but when you're asking the networking team to manage a software stack like Cloudvision or other, and this comes from my past experience, you get pushback because these are folks who are not used to deploying these types of applications, maintaining them. They have to request servers. Now it's becoming more and more common, but it's still not, especially when you're talking about the enterprise space where you have your more traditional network engineer who's been focusing on networking and less so on platforms and infrastructure and software. That still may be a challenge, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's literally just the operational challenge of deploying something like this. But I just have no experience with Cloudvision specifically to know how difficult deploying that application
neither do
is.
Neither do I. And we should state that up front, right? Like neither you or I have used Cloudvision. We have no idea how complex it is to deploy or maintain. And maybe they are solving a problem. I don't know.
But the thing is, and relating to my past experience, where we did try and deploy, and we did successfully as well as unsuccessfully, but we tried to deploy these application stacks to control the network. There was a lot of pushback. I mean, it was more than I anticipated, all to the point where some customers were actually asking for hardware appliances to do this, right? So they would say, we would say, hey, here's a bunch of VMs you're going to spin up, right? And that's going to contain your application stack. And within that, we're going to make sure everything's automated, but you need to at least deploy this VM or two or three. That was in itself a challenge, to the point where some people were saying, no, just give me a hardware appliance. I want to plug in a box. I'm going to plug in a couple cables, and it's going to auto configure itself and give me a nice interface to go and play in, right? So if that's still true, if that is, and I've been removed from that particular use case for a few years now, but if that is still the case, then maybe I could see something like this as solving that problem. I just didn't think it was that widespread, but
yeah, I mean, we haven't dug into the kind of commercials of this, and we can't dig in too far because I have no idea how much this thing costs. But yeah, I don't know. The trend in the industry is to try and not tie yourself to vendors. That's the reality, right? Unless you have some kind of like long-term partnership with a specific vendor and you're happy and you're being served to whatever your needs are. I just said, like, what happens if on like 2 years down the line, you decide that actually Arista is not for me, but I still have a bunch of platforms. I prefer not to be writing them checks every month. I'd really like to move on to another vendor or something. Like, I think there's where this might fall apart is in commercials, right? In that, like, forget all the other drawbacks that might exist in terms of pushing all your stuff to public cloud, losing control, and a lot of customers will care about that. At a certain point, this will become less cost effective than running it on-prem. Like, without question, it's a fact, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be offering it. They'd just stick with their on-prem solution, unless they think this is going to pick up adoption. But I would argue that the reason people buy Cloudvision is because they've bought Arista switches. So It's not like Cloudvision is how you lead the sale. It's kind of the icing on the top of the cake, right? And the cake being the switch in this case. And again, these are all assumptions. Maybe I'm wrong, but logic dictates that people buy switches. They need to manage them. Cloudvision helps them do that. If they bought Arista switches, Cisco has ACI or DCNM. Nokia has the Fabric Services platform, and we all have solutions, right? There's solutions out there. I don't know. It's interesting. I think there's a lot of drawbacks, honestly, unless you're the type of customer that really wants that turnkey solution. And then, I don't know. Is it better to just pay professional services to do this for you? I don't know, because we don't know the commercials, right? But I think this really has to be driven by commercials, because I otherwise hire a guy that knows, right? Like, if your problem statement is I don't know how to manage Cloudvision on-prem, and your solution is to push things off-prem.
But I think that's a bit yes. I mean, it depends if the problem statement is a lack of skill set to manage such an application stack. Sure, but I would say that would fall also if you don't have that skill set. Hiring one person to do it probably wouldn't be enough. You probably have organizational structures and the way you access compute resources to host your VMs. May be part of the problem. And so having a human being that understands what a VM is and how to manage the software stack wouldn't be enough unless they had the infrastructure to support it. And sometimes that barrier, and it comes back to kind of a communication issue or siloing of companies between infrastructure, network, and storage, or however you want to silo it, that becomes also part of the problem. So just throwing technical understanding of how this is supposed to work at it is just not the fix. It's a bigger organizational change that maybe was the challenge in the first place. Whereas now the networking guys don't have to talk and they don't have to put any sort of reliance on having ownership of a server or 2 or 3 or 4 or an entire rack, or relying on infrastructure hosted by another group within the organization that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's purely driven by commercials, though. Like, because if it, you can hire talent. Agree, I think. Like, if this doesn't make sense from a financial perspective, you won't do it. Like, you really won't. No, but there's reasons. Like, there's problem statements that you can't solve yourself. Right. There are genuine problems you cannot solve yourself, and you do need someone else to solve for you. Hosting your management system, I don't know. I don't know if that fits into that bucket, because it's not that complex of a product. If it was that complex of a product, then Arista has outright failed, right? I think a big part of it, is the easy button, and not that it's overly complicated. My camera's about to shut off. Not that it's overly complicated. That's amazing. I saw it flash. It flashed at me. But it's not as easy as just having it hosted and just logging into a nice fancy UI. Building your configurations there, building your design and your ZTP framework. Just that's where you start. You're starting at a nice web UI versus starting at let me put a request in for 17 servers, and what kind of storage do you need? Okay, good. Okay, do I have that? I don't really know. Let me go to that team and find out, and blah 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 blah. Right. So it's like a easy. No, button. But it's like you can do that in public cloud without paying Arista to host it for you. That's like where it gets stuck, right? Like, if really the problem is managing like physical infrastructure on-prem, figuring out storage, figuring out compute, for sure, run it in public cloud. Do that and turn your infrastructure into an OpEx model. Like I'm all for that. Like I mean, and it's an undeniable trend. Like not only in networking but in the application world, right? Moving things into public cloud. We're doing that. We're doing that now, today, yesterday, a year ago. What I struggle with is the having someone else manage it for you, like, because that's really the difference, right?
I think you're overlooking the complexities involved in moving that to the public cloud on your own. I don't think it's that easy for a few reasons.
But you don't move, right? Like, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I did interrupt you, so I'm gonna finish. The idea of running it in the public cloud means that you're starting from that. You're not migrating.
No. You would just finish saying that if the advantage was running in the public cloud, people would have just taken the appliance that they get from Arista and then run it in the public cloud themselves.
Yep.
That is what I was talking about. And that is not as easy as doing just that, like you said. And this comes from my experience of having worked with a system like that, where there was very stringent requirements in terms of IOPS of the disk, resources, and even go as far as potential vendor support, where it just is not a supported configuration. And this comes from maybe the architecture of the software, but it wasn't a supported model where even if you could and you ran it in the public cloud, if you opened a ticket and for whatever reason the appliance wasn't performant and you said, yeah, it's running in a public cloud, that not that it would void your support, but it certainly would put a wrench in that conversation where that's not a supported model, therefore hosted on-prem because that's what we support. And so I don't think it's as easy as saying, well, my advantage is put it in the public cloud. I would rather have that operational model and from an OpEx perspective, whatever it may be. So I'm just going to do that. I don't think is as easy as you're making it out to be. And so maybe...
No, I mean, I don't want to undersell the complexity, right? I don't want to do that, but you need to
maybe that's part of the value is that you are getting it in that model, that operational model.
You know, I mean, I think if you're committed down the path of using a certain stack, right? And I think that plays a lot into this of how committed you are with the stack you're investing in. Maybe it makes sense. I don't know, from a wide market appeal, and maybe they're not trying to hit wide market appeal. Maybe this is targeted to specific customers that can't drive this kind of thing themselves. I feel like if it's not cheaper to run it with Arista hosting it, it's probably cheaper long term to hire someone who knows what they're doing and to have them do it, like even if it's in public cloud, right? Or even if it's on-prem. It needs to make sense financially. Otherwise, I don't know.
No, I think that's automatic. I think that's automatic, and I think there needs to be some financial driver. Absolutely, it's just anything around that. I think is the why.
Yeah, and like, how do you? I'm sure. I mean, they've apparently figured it out. How do you PXE boot or do ZTP and reimage a switch from public cloud? I mean, you're just stitching an L2 domain, I guess. So technically speaking, it's possible, especially if you're running like some kind of overlay. But yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear the reality, like how much of this really does work, and how much of it is.
I mean, I can't question how much of it works. I mean, I assume I have to take it for face value. If it says they can do ZTP as a service, and they can do ZTP as a service, however that works. Obviously, whoever is actually going to deploy this will have to look at that in more detail. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason for me to believe that it wouldn't work. Let's put it that way. But I lost my train of thought again.
No, I'm sure it was good. So no, I think there's a few things to unpack here, and we don't have all the information, and there's no possible way we can get all the information. So we do have to take it as at face value, like you said. Look, I do think it's an interesting idea. We've seen the SaaS model really, like, I mean, it's kind of crushing it in the application world, right? There's probably a few reasons behind that. I do think a lot of these applications were actually relatively hard to deploy on-prem. Like if I look at like SAP HANA or something, I know I'm making that example again, but I'm assuming that was relatively complex to deploy with absolutely zero like information to back that up. But you've got like a database, and the database probably has to be quite performant. All the stuff you just talked about, right? Like the general disk performance, like what's your IOPS look like, and how many cores do you need, and what kind of cores are you? What's the instruction set you're using? Do you need Skylake? Is it Cascade? I mean, there's so many different aspects. You and I have both seen it, right? When you're trying to deploy one of these management systems, the actual physical requirements, they're no joke. They're really, really no joke. Like the latency to storage is important. So as soon as you start trying to virtualize these things, I mean, if you go back far enough, a lot of these applications couldn't be virtualized because you couldn't move. Well, they could, but you were often hamstrung by the fact that the storage needed to be local, right? Like you couldn't RDMA things because that introduced enough latency that these applications started to fall over, or you were outside of the specs that your vendor gave you, and so you couldn't get support. We've all seen that, and it's horrible and it sucks. But yeah, I don't know. I'm torn a little bit because I don't know if it solves the problem.
I think the appeal, and this comes down also to 100% user experience, but the appeal, I think, is first of all to the smaller enterprises. I don't think we're talking extra large or even the web scalers. I don't think they have a use for this really personally. I think we're talking enterprises, small networking teams, and an easy button. That the user experience has to be like that. It has to be seamless. It has to work. It has to be easy. There can't be any complexities because that's what you're selling. Is you're selling like.
How many customers do you think fall into that
a lot
category?
I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot of small customers. I think you're running into who you're targeting is the small players, small enterprises, medium enterprises, maybe even large. I don't know how you.
I'd agree with that.
That's
and
I think there's a lot of them.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of them, and I think what this is gonna do for Arista is, push Cloudvision to customers who may not have opted to use it because they didn't have to deal with some of those complexities, which we briefly touched about running this stuff on site. So I think it opens a new avenue.
I'll counter all that by saying the customer that has 4 Arista switches, do they need Cloudvision?
No, I'm not saying 4. I mean, there's a size there, obviously, that
sure.
this fits into.
Of course, but again, like it's this small niche market, which is I can't run this myself, or I'm commercially or internally motivated to not own this myself.
Yeah,
and it's commercially viable to the point that I know that you're gonna extract some margin from you hosting this and me consuming it. But I have enough switches in my network that I actually have a need for Cloudvision, because I'm sure if you look at all deployments, and you'll see this across any vendor outside of ACI and Cisco, because once you're sucked in, you're sucked in. But for all the other solutions out there, I think there's a lot of cases that those smaller players won't deploy Cloudvision because they have no real need for it.
I guess the problem is defining small players and the sizes. I think we're talking maybe different sizes.
I mean, yeah, for
when
sure.
You talk about
it's all relative.
4 switches,
it's all relative, right?
Yeah. I guess it's it comes down to that, because I think there is a market. I think there is a market there for folks who big enough that they want to start doing some sort of stuff with Cloudvision, whether it be configuration management, the whole ZTP, statistics collection, telemetry, whatever it is that it provides. But not have to go through the motions of having to set this up and manage it themselves. But if you gave it to me, if I could just log into a web UI and it's pretty easy to click around and do what I need to do, then hey, why not? Maybe it's worth me investigating that extra cost and see if it's worth me using something like Cloudvision.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to discount it. I'm just trying to figure out where it fits. And like I think you end up with like a fraction of the market, and I mean that's okay, because a fraction of a very large market can still be a lot. It could be a lot, right? I'm not opposed to it with that in mind. I do think there is dangers to moving to a fully OpEx model where literally your hands are just completely tied, right? Like your vendor, they have your balls in a vice. I don't know a lot of customers that are super keen on having their balls in a vice with a vendor. That being said, actually, you know what? I'm going to leave it there, because the difference between this and the application world is the hardware component, right? That's the big difference. In that, let's say you're unhappy with your SaaS, whatever the software stack is. I'm not even going to name names, but let's say you have a solution from one software provider and it's a SaaS model. You're consuming it. and the next day you decide, you know what, you guys are screwing me over and I'm getting fleeced and I want to move to someone else who provides a similar solution, also in a SaaS style model, you can do that, right? You can just flip over. The problem with this is that it's linked to a hardware sale, in that you can't do that. You can't do that at all. You're already kind of doubling down on this specific vendor. There is no flip-flop, you know? So I don't know if that whole OpEx model makes a lot of sense in that case, in that you already have like Arista switches on-prem, right? Otherwise, you're not super interested in Cloudvision, I assume.
Yeah.
So you're kind of already sucked into the vendor, in which case does the SaaS model buy you a lot outside of this? Like, all the reasons SaaS works is, I mean, a lot of things, and some of them overlap for sure. Like the general maintenance, like the turnkey aspect of it. Those overlap. But why SaaS, at least in my mind, is super interesting is like, if you don't like Microsoft Office 365 this week, you can be like, you know what, we're moving. We're moving to, I don't know, Google Docs or something, you know? And I mean, I'm simplifying things for the sake of argument, but it's something realistic that you can do. It takes a lot longer than a week, but it's something you can do. With Cloudvision, you have hardware on-prem. You ain't moving. There is no Cloudvision from another vendor that'll manage Arista switches outside of maybe Apstra. So you're kind of sucked in already, right? So I feel like a lot of the reasons SaaS succeeds, or it's a model that people are interested in, outside of the typical, you know, it's purely OpEx and it's very easy to maintain from like a book's perspective. Yeah. I don't know. I'm skeptical. Honestly, all things said so far, I'm a little skeptical. The only thing you're really giving people is the turnkey. And I feel like if you do a good job with something like Terraform, you can give them a turnkey without owning the solution too. And so the whole I'm going to host it, manage it, you don't have to deal with it. If your solution's built well enough, you don't need to. You can still host or manage the maintenance aspect of it. Like, let's assume your solution is smart enough that you have, I don't know, 10 pods and each one is providing the same service. You could upgrade them over time and transition a customer to a new release. And you don't have to manage the solution and own it in order to do that. You just have to provide a sequence of steps that they do that. Or, you know, even you can do it themselves, not own the actual hardware that it's running on, you know?
Right.
So those are all the reasons I'm skeptical. I do agree that there is a decent sized market for this kind of thing, in that, you know,
I think the sales pitch is going to go something like, hey, here's our solution for the DC, a bunch of switches and Cloudvision, and to make your life easy, we'll just offer a UI for Cloudvision, and we'll just host it all for you. So because the type of customer you're targeting is obviously that's in this case an Arista, but we can talk generically about technology, but an Arista switch buyer. B has decided that Cloudvision provides value to them. Something about it, whatever, you know, and that in itself is prime value. And then once you get to that category, the easier the better, right? So I think
for sure. And I think from an Arista perspective, this is not a bad move to make for them, right? It's not like they're you know, alienating some of their customer base. They're really opening up to additional customers.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think it's bad for Arista. I'm not entirely sold it's good for their customers. Is the bit I'm struggling with a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. In that, I think if I had a decent sized scale network to the point that I'm buying something like Cloudvision, do I want to hand over the keys to the kingdom to Arista? No, I'm already doing that metaphorically by buying their solution, right? But do I want them to own the actual maintenance and the actual life cycle of that solution too? I don't know. There are customers that.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. It's easy.
It makes my life easier. You know?
There are customers that will definitely fall into that bucket, but I personally would not. I can say that much. I personally would not. I would feel very, very sketchy about having my vendor control every aspect of the life cycle of my management system.
What about what about SD-WAN solutions that are completely hosted in the cloud?
There's a complex problem to solve there, though. Cloudvision doesn't solve a complex problem. It's really just taking something you deploy on-prem and running it in the cloud. SD-WAN is That's a complex problem.
But talking about the management and control plane in a lot of cases being completely hosted in the public cloud, because there are SD-WAN solutions that run completely on-prem.
For sure. I feel like SD-WAN, there's a natural almost like inclination to use public cloud as almost like an exchange point for your various branches, because it's easy. Like
you're talking
you have a remote
like
problem,
a data
right?
path perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm talking management system. Let's think about a management system where the place
you have to go into public cloud. You have to go into public cloud anyway, in most cases. So you're already kind of bought into the concept of running things off.
That's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. I don't agree. Some solutions, yes, they do use public cloud gateways as interconnects between different areas. I get that, but from a management perspective, you still have that same amount of information that you may have from an infrastructure perspective that you may have in a DC in a publicly hosted cloud. So like, first of all, customer lists, typically what networks they run, what type of VRFs they run, what type of services and applications they're running, because most of these SD-WAN solutions are doing application discovery. So there's a lot of data that's being stored there. So I don't think that inherently is a huge problem. But if your point on the data center side is that does an enterprise really want to hand over the keys to the kingdom to someone else, and that data may be hosted in the public cloud? Well, it seems like enterprises are already kind of accepting of that when they're looking at SD-WAN, right?
Yeah,
at least in a lot of cases.
Your foot's already in the mud with public cloud. It's already
not
there.
Always. That's not true.
No, for sure. It's not always true. It's not always true. But within a data center, it's absolutely not true. Like, that's the difference. Like, the reason I would want to push things into public cloud, there's no reason I can't do it locally within the data center and have zero information leave my data center. With SD-WAN, there's a WAN piece to that, right? Like, there's an external piece to that.
Right.
In that you have remote branches that you're trying to connect back to a central branch. Now, you could do that without public cloud. I'm not going to debate that for sure. A lot of solutions exist that will not touch public cloud and will stitch you back to like an IPsec gateway or something. But there's another option, which is to not do that, right? Which is to go directly to your DC gateway or something. But that requires a lot of investment. And you already are dealing with an either or scenario in that both models are viable, and I think the commercial aspects of them are probably closer. Like, it's not going to be that much of a difference between, trying to stitch things through like a public cloud gateway. I guess my main point is you're already outside of your cluster, your pod, your data center, right? With SD-WAN, you're already external. So you're already sending your information over an external network, a WAN network, unless you're like a proper bowler of a carrier and you have your own WAN. It's going over an ISP anyway. So your data is already out there.
But where that data is stored? No, but now we're talking about transport. But I mean, I just meant in general, like information about what networks are where, statistics about the various branches and the applications they're running, the security rules, ACLs, all that is stored outside of the private data center. It's stored in the public cloud.
I believe it.
You're talking specifically about transporting encrypted, information.
No, but the cost is if I have a bunch of remote branches, right? This is the classic SD-WAN use case. If I have a bunch of remote branches, I have two options. I can I have a lot of options, but we'll keep it to two just for argument's sake. I could push all that data into public cloud. There's a cost to doing that, or I could push things into my on-prem data center. The difference between those two is purely about like how much it costs to store the data and so on and so forth.
Right.
But you're already external, right? So you're really thinking it's a different problem statement. And I personally would not equate the two, because the difference with something like let's go back to Cloudvision. Is that I could host that purely within my on-prem data center. That's the model today. No external connectivity required, no WAN required, no public cloud required, nothing. Purely isolated within the data center. SD-WAN cannot do that. They're already external. You're starting with an entirely different problem statement.
No, I don't think that's true. Like the information, the management information about your network, you can 100% store on-prem.
Yeah, but you could.
On a lot of SD-WAN solutions.
You totally could. But you're already external. The remote branches are external. They have to get information back to that central management system somehow, right? Whether that be via the public cloud and all the management system is in public cloud, or it's on-prem and you put it all on-prem. you already have an external problem with SD-WAN, in that you need to put the information somewhere, and the logical step is not entirely clear in SD-WAN, because the cost of moving that data to public cloud is likely the same, maybe even cheaper, than moving it on-prem. I do not believe that is the case for this, like at all. You have to push the information somewhere. In fact, I'd argue that in a lot of cases it's cheaper to hit like a gateway or like a direct connect or an express route or something within the region that your branch is in, and then you're dealing with like an internal connectivity within the public cloud, than to push that over a WAN network back to your central office, which might be across the globe, right?
Right.
That you start from a different starting point, and I think that changes entirely the way you make decisions, because everything is not already together nice and clean within a single data center. With the use case with Cloudvision, it is. Everything is all together within a single data center. You have no need to hit an external network at all. With a SD-WAN, you're hitting an external network. You're going to do it. Like, you're guaranteed to do it.
Yeah, I actually don't. I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't think there's that huge differentiation to people who are looking at these solutions. Like, if you're already comfortable with hosting your SD-WAN solution management plane and maybe control plane in a public cloud, you're probably not that far away from accepting that your data center solution may also be data center management solution may also be hosted in public cloud.
Sure. Yeah, I don't disagree.
You know what I'm saying? Do you understand? So once you're
Yep.
in that realm, I think that's a mental jump that is probably not that large to make.
But I don't know if it's all, I don't know if it's all
doing
mental,
this.
right? Like, I don't know if it's all mental. Like, the general adoption of public cloud to store information and the logistical figuring out if it's the right thing to do are two separate things for me.
Right.
I agree that if you're going to push stuff to public cloud and you're comfortable doing that in your SD-WAN solution, you've gotten over the first hurdle, which is the I don't have control of my information anymore, or let's not say that. I have less control over my information.
Right.
But does that mean that I want to push everything there? I think there's another hurdle that I'm talking about that is to do with how simple or how complex you want to make something. And pushing this stuff off into public cloud, what if you lose your WAN connection from your data center? What happens to your management
I have no
story?
idea. I mean, I'm hoping they've thought about this. I have no idea.
I hope so.
I mean, what happens
I hope so.
if you lose connection and all of a sudden you need to all your racks are rebooting because of power issues, which is why you lost connection in the first place, and now all of a sudden maybe
no services have access to anything, exactly, because you can't ZTP.
So that first of all takes away the idea of doing a ZTP per boot, which is something that we I guess haven't talked about, but just a general concept that when a switch boots, it instead of having a config offline that's local to it and it just boots up and loads that it does a full ZTP every time. You obviously never do this like this, right?
I actually do want to segue slightly here, because I think you and I are both aligned in terms of how operators should approach this specific problem, which is the general ZTP problem. Should nodes boot off the network every time? Should they boot?
I think it'll be very quick because we're aligned. So just be a very quick discussion.
No, but I think we should explain why, right? So I'll chime in first, because for those of you at home who aren't following the conversation but are listening in, tune in right now. It's about to get good. The general approach to building a network and to doing the whole network automation piece, we have a podcast on that. You should go listen to it. Is that that we haven't talked about single source of truth like at all throughout any of this, funnily enough, even though I think it is very
actually
important.
Is a core component of network automation, which should have gone into the other podcast that we did earlier, which didn't. So we're going to do another podcast about that. Anyway,
we're going to do a podcast about the podcast to discuss why we didn't cover it in the first podcast.
Seems to be our pattern here of podcasts. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
It does. So the general idea is you have two mechanisms to approach this problem, right? One, and I guess the typical approach, is that you have some kind of persistent storage on your switches and you're constantly maintaining the state of that switch. I mean, I don't know. This is the whole closed loop telemetry.
I'd say this is status
automation
quo.
And all that stuff.
This is
status
quo. This is
it is a status quo.
Most
it's how we build networks today.
Correct.
And then there's a second approach, which we've seen a lot of tier ones start to adopt, which is that the switch itself is kind of dumb in the sense that it's not maintaining its own state outside of what it learns at boot time. And I think you and I both agree this is the approach everyone should go down, which is, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people that would argue with us that, you need some persistent storage, you need some kind of configuration. Anyway, let's not get into that, but generally speaking, there's two approaches to this, which is every time a switch boots, it boots off the network and you push down a configuration. And then there's the second approach, which is the status quo. Maybe I should have made it the first approach. The second approach being the status quo, that you push down a configuration the very first time you deploy or provision a switch. And then from then on, it's kind of standalone outside of your, I'm going to deploy a new ACL policy, or, I'm going to deploy a new service, or whatever it is.
Yep.
And again, I think you and I philosophically agree that you should really provision this thing from a single source of truth every single time it boots, rather than maintaining like a disconnected. Well, I shouldn't call it disconnected, because unless it's changing a lot, it's not that much of a problem. But having a single source of truth is important, right?
Yep.
So is your single source of truth for your network to link it back going to be controlled by your vendor?
Well, if you're accepting of a solution like Cloudvision, then yes. I mean, you're accepting that. You've accepted it already, right? So that's a given. But just to touch on this whole bootstrapping and ZTPing on every boot, that whole idea you just put forward. So I agree completely. I think that the switches need to be treated where basically when they boot up, they're going to relearn state, not learn state. They're going to come up into a state which should be driven by some centralized mechanism, which is going to push the right config, push the right packages. Whatever the switch needs to get into should be fresh every time it boots from a centralized location. I wonder if it does pose some challenges, and I would have some questions for those folks who are doing that today. Things like if your switch reboots because of a problem, maybe there's a software fault and it was able to catch that, but then it had to reboot. That was its solution to fixing it. In an environment where you're ZTPing every time, do you have some sort of ability to carry forward the fact that it did just crash, and that maybe you don't want to bring into service as if it was a brand new box that had no issues, versus if you have some mechanism of storing some data offline, that you could essentially have the mechanism where the switch crashes, but it before it crashes, it's able to set some flag that upon boot it should not rejoin the network and join state. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't do that in the ZTP world. It's not technically impossible.
You could solve that problem a bunch of ways, right? For sure.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if it introduces a new challenge in that way. Actually, but to be fair, I don't even know of any switches that really do that today.
I do.
Did they have that they have the ability to? From the big.
No, you're right.
Switch vendors that can they crash? But when they come back online, know that they crashed, and therefore be in a maintenance mode until an operator approves that they may come back into service. I don't even know. Maybe you can tell me.
No, I mean, solutions do exist. Do exist for exactly this, right? I mean, they're typically dealing with more critical failures. Typically, things like, people I'm sure have heard of like amnesia mode on Junos style devices. Cumulus has the same thing. They exist, but they require some kind of fairly massive failure. It's really more to do with you not being able to learn your current state, and the current state not being from the network either. Like, let's say your configuration is zapped, or you no longer have the partition you're expecting to mount to pull in a bunch of configuration or whatever doesn't exist. Then they have kind of these like default configurations that do some of that, I guess, but it requires a massive failure, right? It really does require a massive failure. Like, you really want your supervisors or your control modules to go entirely offline, not even be able to access their configuration. So, it's more. So it doesn't. What
you're saying is it doesn't really play as a factor in the do I ZTP every time and I don't think it does. Control a centralized config and packages versus having it locally stored and booting.
I do think that if you do push this stuff off to a single source of truth, the single source of truth is typically better at recognizing that you failed, and maybe not the reason you failed, but certainly that you failed, better than you are, you being the switch. I do think that is definitely the case, and that a controller is going to have access to things like last gasps and the syslogs that happened before you died, and any telemetry data you managed to stream off. Again, I'm using you as the switch here. And they are going to be able to know what your previous state was versus what your current state is and what your desired state should be. Better than you without that knowledge are going to be, unless you're managing to catch like a kernel panic or something, and you're going to core dump and pick up that core dump when you boot and recognize that, oh, that's a critical component, I don't want to start. Yeah, you end up in kind of like you're only capturing corner cases, right? You really are only capturing corner cases. Whereas the central approach to this is, I mean, in my opinion, better, because the controller, or whatever the central system is, has a much better view of the network. They have access to all the systems around you, right? Like all the spines, and if you're a spine, all of the leaf switches. They can infer your state better than you could ever figure out your own state. Like that's the reality.
Do you see a problem in having that extra dependency of, you need that mechanism to do the ZTP process, so you need that network needs to be up. So I think in a world where you're in a massively scaled data center,
could you have both?
Well,
like
maybe
you could have single source of truth as a priority with a fallback of, because I mean, like just because we're talking about single source of truth as if it's one or the other, and
yeah, no, you're right.
Maybe it's a case of priorities. In fact, in most cases,
right? I would expect it to be have its ability to retain a local copy, and only in the event that it's not able to reach whatever centralized system it needs to pull down the latest and greatest, that it would fall back to a local last good known config, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I think you can mix the two while still prioritizing the single source of truth, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, again, we said it at the start. If we're trying to focus on things like data center, which certainly Cloudvision is probably trying to go after. The use case is simpler. Your configuration is probably not changing that much. You still want a single source of truth things, like, for sure, but the source of truth isn't changing that often, and that likely means you can persist things on box more than you would typically do in, say, like a carrier style network.
Agreed.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, to go to wind this full circle and go back to Cloudvision as a service. I don't know. I'm a little torn. People are going to find value at this, right? Arista is going to make money on selling Cloudvision as a service. I think if I were an operator, and I'm not, full disclosure, I would be very, very hesitant on a few things. One is, what is the problem statement that they are solving? And is it a problem statement that I'm willing to pay for? And more importantly, what am I giving up to solve that problem? And I think if you weigh that all in, then I would not use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to agree. I think I agree with everything you said. I think there's a market there for it, however big or small. That's the question, I guess. But yeah, I think that there will be value there for some folks. Would I use it? Like you said, I don't know. I think there's a lot of like, how big my network is.
I won't control, man. Team. I'm all about world domination. I'm not about giving up control to my vendor.
I don't know if control really plays that big of a factor into their target market. I don't know. Like I said,
you could be right. You could be right. I mean, and again, we're all speaking from our own biases, right? I philosophically disagree. It could be.
I wonder if we're going to start seeing like, maybe I'm completely ignorant here. Maybe ACI has ACI as a service publicly hosted, and maybe this is Arista's answer to that. I don't even know. I probably should know.
Neither do I. I don't know.
And others. I mean, does Cumulus, is it called NetQ or something like that?
It is NetQ, yeah.
Yeah, does NetQ have a hosted solution? I wonder if this is going to trigger a
response from
a response where
market.
People does Apstra for their management system, do they have a cloud hosted solution? I don't know. This is going to trigger me to go spend some time on Google, is what this is actually going to do, to find that out. But I suspect not, because this feels like it's the first time I've heard of a data center switch fabric management solution being cloud hosted.
It's not just cloud hosted though, right? Like I think we need to be clear. This is hosted by your vendor. It's not.
No, but
it being in public cloud is a side effect.
I think that's assumed. I would be hard pressed to find a scenario where people are buying something like Cloudvision and themselves hosting in the public cloud. So I think when we say
no, but the distinction is who has control. Because where it's deployed, I don't think matters that much. I don't. There's the support angle which you brought up, super valid for sure, but generally I think my main concern with this is just that it's not that it's running in public cloud. I mean, people will have concerns with that. It's that you don't own it. It ain't yours.
I know that. I understand that. I get it. I just don't think. I think that's fine. I think for the target market, that's going to be a-okay.
Yeah, I believe you. I would agree. I think for the target market they're trying to hit with this, they're not going to care about not having control. I don't think anyone that's buying in volume is going to consume the solution. I think we already agreed on that, right?
Yes,
that there's no way anyone who's buying in volume is going to consume the solution.
Right.
Unless they're mad and Arista's giving them some kickbacks.
We
totally could. Like that's the beautiful thing about kind of any kind of technical industry, right? Is that sometimes logic does not win.
Yeah.
Or we could just be naive and we're stupid. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's also a strong possibility that there's some value here that we're missing. And in fact, there's folks that I've spoken to about this recently who would probably challenge us on that, and they would be able to provide their point of views that have value. I don't personally see it. We'll see.
No, neither successful. I really don't see it either. I think unless you have the ability to sell into those smaller markets, and I don't know how many vendors really do. I don't know. People are going to buy this solution.
People will buy it because it's an easy button.
Because it's an easy button. Yep. But I think if you were to roll this out on a long enough timeline, buying Cloudvision as a service is a bad idea, is what I would say. Like on a long enough timeline, right? That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah. Yep. It's a valid 2 cents. We'll allow you to have your 2 cents.
I enjoy my 2 cents. It's important.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the natural conclusion here.
Yeah, I think we're good.
People are going to buy this.
Progress, and people are going to buy this. Some aren't. Yep.
Some people will buy it. Some won't. I'd argue that most won't. But at the end of the day, Arista's just trying to expand. They're trying to tap into new markets, new customers that they couldn't hit before because their solution was either too complex or I don't know, whatever the motivations are. At the end of the day, we shouldn't throw stones at vendors trying to innovate.
No. And it's like maybe this is going to trigger something. This is going to trigger something that neither of us are seeing coming, and maybe it's going to be the status quo in like 3 years that every enterprise is going to be using a SaaS for their fabric management.
I like that you qualified that with like enterprises. And
that's what I think the target market is, but I could be completely wrong. Who knows? Maybe your web scale
I would agree.
Consuming
I would 100% agree
in the cloud. I don't know.
If there's anyone who buys over 100 Arista, I'll draw the line at 100. If you're buying over 100 switches and you think it's a good idea to host your management system,
you're making enemies here. You're making bold claims.
And that's fine. That's fine. Like I'm okay with that.
How dare you have an opinion?
Yeah, and you think it's a good idea to have your vendor own your management solution? Not only provide it, but own it.
I don't think it's as bad as I'm in agreement that I don't think it's a great idea. I don't think it's as bad as you think it is. I think that we're a little bit apart on where we feel that comfort level is, and I think I'd be more comfortable with it than you are apparently.
I mean, and that's fine. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. I don't like giving up control. Like that's my thing. So if I was an operator, sell me the solution, but for the love of God, don't try and own it. Like, it's mine. I paid you money for it. It's mine now. It's mine.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. All right, let's wrap it up.
Alrighty.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Any closing? No closing thoughts. All right.
No,
all right,
I'm ending. This is it. We've just been rambling on for the last 10 minutes, so no closing thoughts.
No closing thoughts. All right. Well, thank you for listening, as usual.
Yep.
We will definitely see you in the next one. Cloudvision as a service. What do you guys think? Let us know. We could be entirely wrong. We could be so misguided, but I don't know. I don't think we are.
We're gonna get flamed for this for not agreeing.
Yeah, for sure. That's okay.
Catch up.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, please do let us know any feedback or criticisms you may have. We can be reached on Twitter, YouTube, or our website, ntwr.kn, where you'll find this episode and many others posted. For those of you on YouTube, if you liked the episode, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you didn't like the episode, feel free to hit the thumbs down button twice. On a side note, you know those cliche, "these are our opinions and not that of our employer" statements you hear all the time? Yeah, we unfortunately have to make one of those. The benefits of working in the industry we want to publicly have an opinion about. We've done our best to remove bias, but we're only human and we make mistakes just like you. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next one.